Inspector Loken will also mute your video just until your agenda item comes up, okay? Thank you. Mr. Mayor, we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for this evening, and welcome to our virtual meeting. I'd just like to welcome everybody, and I'd like to call the meeting to order for June 15th at 5 p.m. And I'd like to ask one of my colleagues on council for the adoption of the agenda.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Moved by Councillor Ross for the adoption of the agenda. Any additions to the agenda from council? Seeing none. Mr. Farbrother, any changes or additions from administration?
None, Mr. Mayor.
Seeing none. Okay, thank you very much. No changes or additions. So with that, I'll call the question on the motion for the adoption of the agenda. Okay, thank you very much. That's been carried. And we are going to move forward with business items. We're going to start off with 4A. Mr. Farbrother, you have an update on COVID-19. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As everybody is aware, the province announced the acceleration of moving to stage 2 in terms of relaunch last week. It was about a week early. And within the announcement, the province did indicate that they would not be renewing the provincial state of local emergency. There are some municipal state of emergency still in effect in the province, but as council is aware, Spruce Grove never actually enacted one. We were able to conduct a business without that. But with the removal of the provincial state of local emergency, it does not remove the various health orders that are really, the centerpiece of the province's strategy as it relates to COVID, with respect to physical distancing, self-isolation, and public gathering in terms of sizes and composition. With the opening or reopening of the economy, or the continued reopening of the economy, a number of services that are provided by municipalities are now able to be provided again. And this includes things like recreational centres, spray parks, pools, and to some degree team-based sports activities. All of these come with a set of detailed regulations in terms of how they should be conducted. And so that guides us in terms of how we provide those services back to the public. In terms of large-scale facilities, obviously the city's most significant one is the TLC. That would be presumably a staged reopening. It is governed by a separate board, but that would seem the normal course of events. In terms of spray parks, we are looking to open those as soon as we can, and I'll get more into the details of those in a minute. And as mentioned, mini leagues, or as the province describes them as bubbles, can now start to occur for some sports teams. It is still, and I know I'm like an old record, it's still important to remind people that COVID is around. Certainly on a global stage, it's nowhere near reaching its height. It's still got a long, long way to go. But certainly in Canada, it's on a downward trend at this point. So what are the specifics as it relates to Spruce Grove? Well, the Emergency Management Agency has been working through the various details of the various regulations. And we're opening up as much as we're able to do so within those regulations. Predominantly, the balance that the province has tried to identify is to provide access as much as possible, but at the same time, keeping people safe. With respect to outdoor recreational activities, the province is now allowing, in a sense, mini leagues or up to 50 people associated with the sports activity. So a simple example of that may be 2 baseball teams in terms of the players, the coaches, the referees, or the umpires, etc. So it would probably mean that 2 teams can play each other on a regular basis, but those 50 people have to be the 50 people that continue to connect as opposed to playing other teams, for obvious reasons. You're creating groups of individuals playing together and therefore mitigating risk. We've met with the various sports organizations. They're fully aware of the opportunity that provides. We will be moving into opening, well, the sports fields are open, but in terms of booking sports fields, it will resume in July. And we have provided opportunities where there is an obvious group that could maintain and look after the porta cabins or washrooms, that they will do that as part of the service, because the city is, as you are aware, is physically running at about 2/3 capacity in our staffing as it relates to open space recreation and public maintenance. Same is true of the pickleball courts and the tennis courts. All the remaining courts are now open. With respect to spray park and splash pads, Central Park should be open by the end of the week and should be available when the rain stops in a couple of days. But the end of the week should be open. Jubilee Park is almost like a swimming pool when it comes to regulations, provincial and municipal regulations. And so we're getting staff on board. We're going through the various requirements that we have to bring on a facility of that nature, and we're trying to get that open as soon as we possibly can. But we've rehired the staff, and we're working through the public safety orders that would which would govern that particular spray park. With respect to Fure Sports Park, there is a very small spray facility there. It is manually activated, and so we're at this point, we're going to leave that one closed, where the others can activate water flow without personal touch. Fure Sports Park and Arena, we're intending to have those remain closed at the moment. It's a very quiet period of time for ice, obviously, this time of year. And then with respect to the sports park, because the stage 2 teams are really practicing as opposed to fully fledged leagues, it's more cost effective to keep that facility open and have teams play on the outdoor surfaces. We will not be reinstigating the drop-in day camps because we can't kind of manage that 50-person bubble requirement with drop-in scenarios. And again, this also relates to sort of the finances as well. When we look at facilities, it's around public access. It's the level of subsidy that is required to run a facility. It's the number of people that would benefit from that activity, and can we do it safely as well? So those are kind of the criteria that we look at. In terms of cities' administrative facilities, they remain closed to walk-in traffic. In all honesty, in the last 3 months, I think we've only had one situation where we've needed to find an alternative method so that somebody could pay a bill. Otherwise, we're just finding that the public is much prefer, it's easier for the public to do it online or just drop it in the box and don't have to line up and wait and those kind of things. So at the moment, those are remaining closed. And there's a couple of other facilities. Horizon Stage, we had already scheduled to remain closed until the end of the summer. Anyway, again, that ties in with the typical booking season, so there's no real reason to be reopening that. The schools are closed as well. And Elks Hall would require a staffing requirement and certain protocols. So at this stage, we're evaluating whether we open that or not, but at the moment it remains closed. From a staffing point of view, staff remain in the pod model in the same way that the provinces sort of created the bubbles with the sports teams. It just mitigates and reduces risk. And I think that's about everything I've got to update.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Farbrother. I'll open up the floor to council. If there's any questions, I'll start with Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Mr. Farbrother. In a recent briefing, you told us that it would be there would be a $25,000 cost to get the spray park ready for reopening. What's involved in that?
Well, I believe it wasn't to reopen the park. It's at the spray park. It's the actual cost of running the park through the summer. So it's the staffing and it's the net impact of having the spray park operate all summer, not just to reopen it.
Okay, thank you.
Having said that, we have found accommodation within the budget to do that.
Okay.
Councillor Oldham, then Councillor Acker, then Councillor Stevenson.
Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question. Mr. Farbrother, what would be the trigger or what would have to happen in order for front desk services in City Hall to open up again?
Well, there's two things. If there was obviously if there was significant public demand, some of the more rural communities have found, because people travel long distances, they're coming in, suddenly finding a building isn't opening. That creates some frustration, obviously. But you know, we're in an urban environment here, and essentially, you know, with our utility billing, for example, and the deferral of the utility payments, we had one person where we had an issue in terms of paying the bill. So if you look at the staffing requirements and the costs versus the more efficient systems that we can provide, we feel at this point it's probably better to remain closed. It also gives us an opportunity, in a sense, to look at some form of re-engineering of some of our business processes as well. So rather than have COVID all be a kind of a negative story, maybe there's some positives as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Oldham. Councillor Acker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Oldham asked my first question, but my second one would be, with the spray park plan at Jubilee, would that also open up the washrooms in the Jubilee Park?
It would certainly open the washrooms where the spray park are, yes.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
And the changing rooms.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Farbrother, how are we managing crowd control, especially at the Jubilee spray park? It's easy to get 100 people there in no time, especially when we announce it. So how are we enforcing the 100 people limit?
So the analysis that Parks and Recreation has done has said that essentially we won't have 100 people in the spray park at one time. It's probably in the order of about 50 people, and it will probably be a case where you get to book, you know, if you go in the morning, you get to go in the morning, but you probably don't get to go in the afternoon. Because under the regulations, we are actually going to have to clean that facility every 2 or 3 hours. So we're going to have to physically shut down the facility to clean it. And that makes a logical break where, you know, the first group of 50 people can use it, and then probably a next group of 50 people can use it. So it won't be spontaneous use. It'll probably be a form of booking activity, simply because of the physical size of the facility, social distancing, and also meeting the provincial requirements in terms of keeping the facility clean and safe. So the regulations are going to drive the capacity, not just the 100 limit.
So when you say booking, can you clarify? Imagine there's going to be a lot of questions on this, that it's not spontaneous use and you can just go at any time. So are they going to be required to go onto a website and sign up for a day? Can they sign up for 5 days in a row? Like, I'm sure there's also a question about fairness, and I'm sure there's still some logistics.
So
but in terms of messaging, what do we say?
Okay, so our messaging will be equitability in terms of access or equal access rather than, a group doing it, getting on all the time. But David's been waving his hand about 3 times, and I always know when David's waving his hand, there's something really important.
David's ready to jump in, Simon.
Okay.
Go ahead, David.
It's still to be determined. This was just something that they're working through right now. They are in constant communication with public health officials to understand the best way in which we can manage it. They're trying to work through that right now. We don't have all the details yet, but they'll be working with our communications department as that's finalized and a plan is in place to roll that out to the public. So there's information available to them well in advance, so we understand. So I don't have all the answers yet because we're just trying to get this up and running and get staff going. But this was something that I just got this morning, that they're working similar to what they do with the recreation drop-in programs. Is something like that, where that'd be pre-booking, but they're working through that and they'll work with communications and to get that out to the public well in advance of opening.
Okay, so that's great for the spray park. Is that the same for the Central Park that's opening on Friday, or is that going to be use at your own risk?
That would be similar to a playground, which would, because there's no staffing presence there.
At there.
So it'd just be.
Okay.
Yeah, you're probably going to find somewhat similar protocols with it when it comes to the opening of the pools and stuff as well.
Okay.
There is going to be a level of inconvenience here, and it's probably going to, it's probably going to be better on a hot summer day that that you're going to get in one of the sessions as opposed to standing in line for 5 hours and never getting in. So I think that's what we'd rather try and manage, because, if it's just first comes, first serve, then people are just it'll be like the Folk Fest and all the mats on the hill kind of stuff, the mad rush. So it's going to be some challenges around this, but we'll try and do it in a way where as many people get to experience the facility as possible.
Okay. And I guess my last question follow up to this is, let's say you have 3 kids, but one's a newborn and you come to the splash park. Is that counting as 4 people? Like 2 kids in the splash park, mom sitting at the side or dad sitting at the side with the newborn baby? Like, is everybody considered one person?
So we try and use the level of common sense here, but we're also going to need to, have a position that everybody can see as being fair. So it may be that, this is the kids actually in the spray park. We're probably going to, it's fenced off. So there's nothing stopping, the family group of 4 or 5 people sitting outside and enjoying the park as well. So they may just people may decide to end up signing up just for children to go in, for example. But obviously with young kids, that's a little bit more difficult.
Okay.
But yes, there's the demand is going to exceed supply by a lot.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
I think, Mr. Farber, and thank you. I know that staff are working on this, and I've had this conversation with a few residents as well, and even the idea of using a wristband for people that come in. They get an hour in there. The first 25 people get a red wristband. There's another 25 people that are lining up. They get a white wristband, and then you can do a rotation like that on an hourly basis, but so that people can access it. And when they're lining up, that their people are able to come and go, and they're the staff are going to be counting. I think it's going to be kind of a work as you go progress, but something that we would be able to discern. And staff, we've got some time to think about that, but that was just one of the suggestions of people using wristbands and for an hour, and then they'd have to leave and that type of thing. But anyway, I'm glad to hear we're moving toward that. Any other questions or comments? Councillor McKenzie, did you have a question? No. Anybody else? Okay, could I get a motion, please, to accept for information Mr. Farbrother's report? Moved by Councillor Acker. To accept for information. He had his hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Acker, make a motion.
So move, Mr. Mayor, to accept this report as presented.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, I'll call the question on the motion to accept for information. Thank you. Okay, that's been carried. Moving forward, it's always a pleasure when the RCMP come and present, and they're well into their new facility, and from the number of different people I've talked to, they're certainly happy with the new digs, and they're excited about working out of there. So we have a special presentation this evening from the RCMP to talk about the trends and things that are going on in Spruce Grove. Mr. Wolanski, could you introduce our presenter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, as you know, will introduce Inspector Mike Locken for council. We do try and come 3 times a year. We had a report earlier, but obviously with COVID and things that changed. So this is his first opportunity for 2020.
Okay, thank you very much. Inspector Locken, welcome again, and looking forward to your report. Go ahead, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I've had a number of meetings like this, so hopefully this one continues. I've got my iPhone hanging on a paper clip on my computer monitor so that I can refer to my notes at the same time. So hopefully our high-tech technology doesn't fall apart here. So first off, I'll start with speaking about COVID-19, because obviously that has had an impact on everyone. And with the RCMP in Alberta, we only had 3 employees contract COVID-19. None of those were in Parkland detachments. So each detachment since the mid to the end of March has been working autonomously to reduce the spread. We weren't allowing overtime in our detachment, nor were we or any other detachments allowing their members to go and work in other areas. So with the number of cases of COVID in the Spruce Grove and Parkland area, we were at fairly low risk, but at the same time, we were taking all the precautions that were recommended through the RCMP and through the province as well. So at the very beginning, we had various levels of employees isolating from home, and a lot of those were as a result of international travel. But after that ended and everybody was back, just with the health recommendations of the province, when someone was symptomatic, obviously they would isolate at home. But we currently don't have anybody isolating at home, but we do have a few employees, support staff, and a couple of regular members who are have compromised immunity, or they have immediate family that's compromised immunity as well. But they've been set up with technology, working from home, and being very effective in those roles. It really has changed the way that we do a lot of things, and probably the most noticeable that the public would have is our front counter. All face-to-face public meetings have been put on hold, and our community policing, a lot of aspects of that has been put on hold as well. So we've been looking at alternatives to stay in touch with our stakeholders, including meetings like this. We've had a number of meetings via Zoom or other platforms that allow us to still communicate, but just not be physically present with each other. In terms of community policing, probably the only thing that, or one of the very few things that we can do right now is participating in the birthday parades along with the fire department. We had a few in Stoney, but most of them were in the city of Spruce Grove by the initiative that was set up between the fire department and us. So it was almost a daily thing. We had to limit it to kids under 12 years old, and any special occasion that was recognized by the Queen, because there was a fair demand. But I can tell you that there was a lot of happy little people out there that when they saw the police and the fire, it certainly made their day. So the focus, like I said, was minimizing the risk to our employees and also to the public. At the very beginning, as we always have, we have a backlog of paperwork, and the way that we changed our process allowed a lot of the regular members and support staff to catch up in a lot of their paperwork. At the beginning, we did see a significant decrease in calls for service, and so that allowed us to play catch up because we were still working. But at the same time, The calls started coming in after a while and increasing, and now we're seeing normal levels of call volume coming into the detachments. So our front doors remain closed at the time being, but there are instructions and phone numbers at the front. Employees are working inside. Depending on what the person is there for, they're either sent away with a website or a phone number, or their information is taken, an appointment is made, or obviously in emergent cases, they're brought inside and they see a regular member. But there are, COVID has allowed us to, I think, progress very quickly in some areas, moving into the electronic world. Because previously, I think a lot of processes had to be, not only did it have to meet the checks and balances at the detachment level, it also had to seek approval at the divisional and the national level as well. And so during COVID, we did a lot of things that allowed us to still provide service delivery, and we shared those best practices with other detachments. But we recognized a lot of efficiencies, I think. One of those is online reporting, which has started for certain cases where people can report them online rather than coming into the RCMP detachment. At the beginning, personal protective equipment, we did have some, but our members were never without, but obviously there were limited supplies, so we had to be mindful of that. But now we are well stocked. I just wanted to bring up that because there were some rumors around that the RCMP had charged different people under the Quarantine Act or the Public Health Act, and I can speak on behalf of Parkland Detachment that we never charged anyone, and as did other detachments in Alberta, and I believe Canada as well. Our focus was on education and compliance rather than enforcement, and I think that we had, when things were explained or people were given a warning, they adhered to that, and they were very receptive. One of the roles that we've taken on is quarantine checks for people who've returned from international travel. We continue to get those. I think last week we probably got in the neighborhood of 15 new ones. And what those are is when somebody crosses the international border to come back into Canada, their name and information is collected by Canada Border Services Agency. It's filtered down to the police agency of jurisdiction, and we have received a number of those because it is under the Quarantine Act that people have to isolate for 14 days after returning to the country, and people have been very compliant with that. We haven't found anybody that was not, so good on them. Again, we implemented a lot of changes. Administrative tasks for the regular members have been caught up, resulting in many of them on the road. And I know that was a concern of the public, is that they were thinking that maybe we weren't as visible, but I can tell you that during the daytime, some of our calls, the actual time of day that we were getting them had a shift, because typically we would see domestic disputes or neighbor disputes or family arguments, things like that, happening in the evening and in the early morning hours, a lot of times when after bars closed and things like that. Whereas now, especially in March, April, we were seeing them in the middle of the day because people weren't at work, and I shouldn't say people, some people weren't at work, and they were at home, and so these things were tending to happen at different times. That said, in the evenings and in the middle of the night, our members were, in order to encourage physical distancing of our members, they were out on the road in their cars and patrolling areas. We received a number of calls from the public concerned about certain areas of the city, and we did focus our patrols in those areas from a combination of concern from the public, along with our statistics that were analyzed by the analyst, showing where those hotspots of activity were. Another positive was the traffic unit that is not a Parkland resource. Was as you know, is based out of this detachment. They they were receiving the emails that I was sending out, or that the analyst and the watch commanders were sending out, requesting patrols in certain areas. So they were doing that as well, in the city and in the county as well. So now in terms of HR, we are down 2 sergeant positions. We have a total of 4 sergeants on the watches, and so we're down 2 of those positions. We have been for some time. But a competition has ran. We've identified 1 successful candidate who's coming from Warrenville, and we expect that person to start in a few weeks. And we're in the process of picking the second. The paper was just received last week from promotions unit, so we're in the process of picking the successful candidate for that. And we're down a significant number of corporal positions right now, and that's because some were transferred out, and the process to get them back, it either has to be lateral interest, or if there's no suitable candidates for the lateral interest, then we have to go to promotion. And I can tell you that there was a lot of interest. In fact, so much interest that we had to bolster. We had to double what's called the competency board, the people that review the applications, because I think combined with the new building and the city of Spruce Grove, everything that comes along with it, this detachment it's an attractive place to work now. So we did have a lot of interest, and so we're in the process of waiting for the successful applicants to go to the next step in that process. So depending on whether they are local constables or whether they are constables from other detachments, we'll determine the timeline on when we get those. But we do have senior constables acting in those corporal positions. And in terms of the constable positions, we have, we're at a good level with those right now. We are full. We've been in consultation with HR, and we've taken on a lot of recruits or cadets from the training academy in Regina. What that means to us is we know when we're getting those people. The flip side of that is that they need to be trained and they need supervision, and it is a learning experience. But I can tell you, we've got a lot of eager, very highly reported on members that have come to the detachment. In fact, we've had about 16 recruits in the last 2 years. So it's a lot of people coming from training. Next topic, in terms of the enhanced funding that's provided by the city, we have developed a schedule along with, of course, we're in consultation with Mr. Wolanski on timelines and when this funding is available. And we've already had, as a result of conversation of concerns raised by the city, we've had 2 shifts concentrating on traffic enforcement because some people have raised concern about that. So they have written a number of tickets and given out a number of warnings as well. And it's a combination of various offenses, and I would say speeding and distracted driving are probably the 2 main ones. Also, in terms of the enhanced funding, we are doing a number of bike patrols out in the city, and the advantage to bike patrol is it's quiet and it's quick. So they concentrate on the bike paths and in the areas where there's thefts from vehicles and other thefts to people's property, and so our guys and girls can roll up to those fairly quietly. And we had some success in identifying some people that were doing thefts from vehicles and have laid charges in those as well. So I sent a list of statistics to Celeste, and I just got to put on my reading glasses because just to refer to them, and I believe that you guys have it with you, so I won't go into them at length. But total persons crime is up 1%, but when you look at serious offenses like sexual assault, other sexual offenses, and assault, sexual assaults are down 47% over last year. Other sexual assaults down 30%, and assaults are down 9%. Now, where things are up under persons crimes are criminal harassment and uttering threats. And so it averages out to persons crimes, seeing an average rise over last year of 1%, which is, it's a very small increase. And I would suggest that the criminal harassment, that can be everything from very serious stalking behavior to repeated annoying phone calls. And under property crime, we have seen a 7% increase. And what the ones that concern me on this list are break and enters up 51% over last year, and theft of motor vehicles up 24% over last year. The ones that do look good are theft over $5,000 is down 21%. Theft under $5,000 is down 14%. And now I know that you're probably wondering why those have gone up. We do have police in the area. I can only speculate, but one of the reasons, obviously sometimes these things are environmental or out of our control, but a couple of reasons could be, typically we see an increase after the end of school gets out into some of these things happening, because people aren't, young people aren't going to school the next day, so they're out and they're doing some things. Now, I don't want to blame this all on young people. There are a number of prolific offenders that we monitor as well, who are typically responsible for a large portion of our crime. And the prolific offenders in this area, there's a fair number of them out right now. And obviously our analysts and our members are monitoring their activities, and but at the same time, there are a lot out of custody right now. So it is cyclical in that when those high risk or prolific offenders go back into custody, we do see our numbers fall. It's very predictable. Now, in terms of our annual performance plan, that goes along with what I was just talking about. Our crime reduction strategy is always top of the mind for the citizens and for the police as well. So we do concentrate on crime reduction and engagement with our communities and partners. In terms of crime reduction, obviously, we've looked at a number of different initiatives for the detachment, and we had a lot of success last year, and we brought the crime rate down, I should say the crime rate did go down significantly, and I would attribute a lot of that to the initiatives that were done. Now, because of COVID, we did collapse the plainclothes units temporarily and put all those members onto the watches. And they were back in uniform, working general duty policing, out patrolling at night and dealing with complaints like that. That said, some of our plainclothes units have reconvened in stages, and our crime reduction unit is still working with the watches, but I can tell you that they are still mindful of the prolific offenders, and the watches, they're distributed throughout the watches. So all the watches are mindful of the crime reduction strategy as well. So they were working on monitoring offenders, doing curfew checks, and things like that. So that's the extent of what I had to present, pending any questions from council.
Yeah, I'll open up the floor to my colleagues on council. And just looking also, Inspector looking at the 5-year trend, it looks pretty, it's pretty impressive, the reduction in the 5-year trend. And there's a few other questions that I do have as well, but I'll open up the floor to start off with Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mayor Houston. Inspector Loken, thank you for the presentation. First of all, I want to thank you and all of your colleagues for your service. This might be the worst time ever to be a cop. Police departments and officers all over North America are under attack, not necessarily physically, but in other ways. And so this may be the most difficult time ever to be an officer. Police officers and police officers used to be one of the good guys, but trust and faith in the police has been eroded, and not always due to the poor actions of all officers, certainly. What has changed is what society and the public view as acceptable. And we know that the vast majority of officers are very good representatives of the force with a genuine interest in serving the public good and affecting positive change and making a difference in their communities. I've read Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing. It's a document. I think it's over 200 years old, and it's probably a document that you and your colleagues are aware of. And I think that police in Canada generally work according to those principles. Please take council's message back to your colleagues and staff that we support you and we appreciate your efforts. We know you do a good job. I do have a few questions. I'm interested in the number of calls related to domestic violence and family problems, and you touched on some of those, and those statistics are in our report. Pardon the mention of EPS, but I listened for 2.5 hours last week to the Edmonton Police Chief briefing City Council in a similar way to what you're doing tonight. And I listened to, and he mentioned that 30% of all EPS calls are related to what he defined as social work calls. Here, the spousal abuse category shows an increase in the first 5 months of 2020 compared to all of last year. And I think the increase is about 6%, which is close to what Edmonton is reporting as well. So I'm wondering, in addition, if you have any further comments about what you expect to happen in relation to family violence, what the Edmonton Police Chief called social work calls, what your expectations might be going forward with people, some people out of work, some people working from home, and maybe they have children, and not only are they doing their work duties, but they're also expected to homeschool children at least until September. So what do you think, or do you have any further comments about that issue?
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments at the very beginning. They're much appreciated. And in terms of the calls for domestic violence, anecdotally at the start of COVID, things, like I said, seem to drop right off and be fairly slow. That said, it was a couple weeks, as we often see in inclement weather in the middle of winter, or other times where people are confined in their houses. Never to this scale, because I mean, I've never experienced a global pandemic before. I've never been a part of that. So overall, people did respond well. Of course, there were people that got on other people's nerves, because being confined into houses, we were having more neighbor disputes. We were having more arguments, and not necessarily domestic violence or assaults, but we were having more arguments or disputes where neighbors were calling concerned about, hearing things coming from next door. And it was typically a lot of families that we never had dealt with before, or very infrequently. So in terms of your question on whether or not, like, what we're forecasting to see, I would, and this is only, my personal opinion, is not based on statistics, but what I would suggest, that now that things are opening up and that people are having some more freedom to get out of their houses, I think domestic violence would probably be in line with what we typically see as the other causes of it. But again, removing the pandemic portion out of it, domestic violence is often one of the stressors, one of the main stressors that cause conflict in relationships, are finances. And when people are unemployed or losing their jobs, or even the threat of having, that instability in their life, or the isolation of not having family supports or community supports, or just an outlet for people to, something as simple as some people going to the gym and working off their steam in there. that there is a lot of frustration that it presents itself in a number of ways. So it looks like Albertans have done very well. I'm actually very impressed with the people in this area on how they responded to the suggestions and the regulations by the province. And I don't know what's going to happen with domestic violence, but if there's a second wave, then obviously we will deal with it as it comes. One of the units that we did not redeploy to the watches was our domestic violence unit, just because of the importance of that and the importance of domestic violence. Those 3 workers that we have focused on that continued in that role, providing supports and planning and suggestion to those who are affected by domestic violence.
Thank you for that. And my second and I think last question relates to the use of dash cams and personal cameras that the officers on the streets use. I'm not sure if all of them do, but I have done some ride-alongs, and I know that the car that I was in had both. Do all of your officers on the street use body cameras and are dash cameras in all of your patrol cars? And are they always used, if so?
The body cameras have not been approved. The RCMP did look at implementing body cameras, and we can't do it at a detachment level. It has to be a rollout either provincially or federally, but typically federally. And the RCMP did do a study about, I think it was in 2015, on the use of body cameras. And they found that with the technology and the storage that was available at the time, that it was cost prohibitive. But obviously, with the reality of what's happening now and transparency, they're looking at it again, I think through some different reasons. And I would suggest that the technology in the last 5 years has improved a lot. Now, in our cars, all of our marked patrol cars have what's called the WatchGuard system installed in them. They have cameras in them, and the officers are typically mic'd up. They have a microphone. So I can see that I think some members of the public have a perception that we don't want that. And anybody that I speak to, myself included, share the opinion that we welcome being mic'd up and having cameras and being able to show, because it not only provides a more accurate picture, it doesn't sometimes provide the whole story. It provides an accurate representation of what happened. It protects the public. It also protects our officers. It's been my experience that in a lot of cases, the cameras do provide a more accurate depiction of than what the concern raised was. And so, like I said, we welcome it.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor Houston.
Sorry about that. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Grilke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Inspector, just one quick question. In your report, you have the list of total motor vehicle collisions as 355 for 2020. I'm talking about 2019, 437. You aren't privy to this yet, but we'll have a report from our Safe Cities that there was a total collisions reported in Spruce Grove of 706. Can you just speak to some reasons why? I assume that because all motor vehicle collisions don't always get reported to the RCMP. Is that a fair statement, or could there be other reasons as to why those numbers don't drive?
Sure, that could be a reason. Obviously, if it's under a certain amount, $2,000, then it's not reportable to the police. So there could be a lot of fender benders that don't meet that threshold that never get reported.
Okay, perfect. I just needed to clear that up for my future questions to the next report. So thank you very much for your time and your service.
Thank you.
It's just a question. When I was noticing the increase in break and enters in Spruce Grove, which was kind of a little bit alarming. I thought that trend was going the other way, but I think looking at the report, it was up 51%. And then theft of motor vehicles is another one concerns me of 24% increase. However, the thefts over $5,000 and stuff have gone down. So the types of break and enters that we're getting, is it just kind of very small petty crime? And secondly, in regards, and that's the first question. And then my second question would be in regards to the auto thefts. It's obvious that we're being targeted, I believe, from outside the community with individuals that come in and steal vehicles. I don't think it's a lot of happening from within the city, but maybe I'm wrong. But what is the primary reason why these vehicles are getting stolen? Are they getting hot wired? Are they getting people leaving their keys in them? I know that in the wintertime, 50% of our auto thefts were related to people leaving their vehicles running. So is that still part of the trend, or go ahead?
The types of break and enters, and keep in mind that if somebody leaves their door open or unlocked, break and enter by definition doesn't necessarily mean that a lock has to be broken or a window smashed. It just means that somebody has crossed the threshold into that property that doesn't normally belong there. So obviously there have been some that have been significant, but then there's other ones as well that, like you said, are small items where they leave their garage open and somebody goes in and takes, it's opportunistic, where they take some tools or some other small item that's of value readily available. And in terms of the thefts from vehicles, we did see an increase in the last couple months of thefts from motor vehicles. And but I can tell you, in my 5 years in this detachment, I can probably count on one hand and have fingers left over where a window has been smashed to get into the vehicle to steal the item of value. It's typically doors left unlocked, and that goes with thefts of vehicles as well. It's typically doors left unlocked, or a house was broken into and the keys were, hanging on the nail right by the door. In most of these cases, the vehicles are either left with the keys in them, or under the sun visor, in the ashtray, in the armrest. People are still leaving their purses and wallets in their vehicles. They're leaving them unlocked. And of course, education is a part of that, because the police are only as good as the people they serve. And there will be people that take advantage of that. So just a reminder to everybody to lock up your stuff and you keep your keys hidden, not necessarily hanging on a keychain right inside your door, or especially don't leave them in your vehicle.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments in regards to Councillor Oldham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for being here, Inspector. You mentioned earlier that you, as a detachment, did some traffic enforcement for speeding and distracted driving based on some kind of concerns from the community. Is that a sustainable solution, and approximately how many hours a week is being put into that? Because we do have a report coming to us on traffic safety and ATE and all that later tonight. So I'm wondering the relationship and the communication between the RCMP and enforcement services on how you work with them and the public to determine where you go, and is that a sustainable solution, or is it only something that can be done readily in these different times?
Well, I would say certainly it's a lot easier during these times when calls for service to other calls are a bit lower. So what we do is, when they have downtime, they can go out and patrol. We do work with the community peace officers in doing different initiatives, whether it be impaired driving is probably one of the main ones, and of course there's other things that flow from that as well. But impaired driving is probably one of the main ones that we focused on with them. Now, the enhanced shifts allow the city, especially if they have concerns over a perceived problem of, say, speeding or distracted driving or other offenses, we can dedicate a resource to that for the entire shift. And that's all that they do. They're not balancing, calls for service from the public, catching up on their paperwork for court packages and everything. They can solely concentrate on those tickets. But like I said before, having the traffic unit based out of this building, I think has been beneficial. That does not reflect in our stats, but it would certainly be a benefit to the city of having this be the beehive for the activity, because the traffic members, as they come and go, if they see offenses, then obviously they're going to deal with them appropriately.
Awesome. And just one follow-up on that. Are you choosing kind of the times and the locations based on feedback that you're getting directly from calls into the RCMP, or is it coming from someone in the city through our protective services, or what allows you to make that decision or guides that decision on timing and place?
It would be a combination. It would be a combination in calls from the city, obviously, if constituents are expressing concerns to the city and we're contacted by Mr. Wolanski or someone else that citizens are having a concern of, say, vehicles racing around in a certain area, typically, at a certain time, or just increased activity in that area, or they're concerned because of, X, Y, and Z. Then obviously we are going to listen to those concerns, whether they come from the city or whether they come from the public. So that would be probably the number one factor in determining where we would go is the concerns expressed by the public.
Great, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't sure I was going to bring this up, but I feel I have to, especially at the comments that Councillor Roth made. So just in terms of what's happening right now with the Black Lives Matter protests going on, I think there has to be a recognition that there is a bit of a reset going on, and I would not put it as an attack on the police. So I certainly hope that you don't take any of my comments as that, but I am wondering what we are doing and what the RCMP is doing in particular to recognize that this movement is happening. And do we offer any type of ongoing training? Do you have discussions about this? And especially now that, we do have so many recruits coming from Regina, how are you dealing with this? Or what are the conversations that were now happening to discuss what's happening right now?
Right, and it certainly is a topic on the front of all of our minds right now. In terms of formal, what the RCMP is doing, we do have a number of courses and programs that are offered to members either online or different courses that are offered through actual attendance for cultural sensitivity training in a number of different areas, dealing with a number of different types of demographics of the people that we typically deal with. Those obviously training is limited to certain numbers of people. And so the people that would deal with that demographic the most, typically those are the ones that get that type of training. That said, there has been a lot of conversations surrounding this. I would expect that because of recent events in particular, that at the national level and at the divisional level, there is going to be a lot of examination of what else we can do. In me speaking personally on the what's happening, obviously I can't speak too much about personal opinion, but all I can say is that obviously as a police officer and as a white male right now, I feel that my place is more, or I should say less, to give my opinion on what I think should happen, and more being receptive to conversations. And when I say conversations, listening to our people in the communities that we serve and coming up with solutions together on what we can accomplish moving forward.
Great, thank you for that as well, because I think we're in very much the same boat. As you look at the colors of our skins right now, we are very, very privileged, and we need to be doing a lot of listening and educating, and certainly we're partners in this as well to be able to educate ourselves and make sure that we're moving forward in a positive way, especially with those that are being affected by what's happening right now. Just to clarify, we are different, obviously, from the Edmonton Police Service. They card right now. We don't do that, right? When you're out, you don't.
Carding by definition, I think obviously if we're investigating suspicious activity in an area, depending on what we're investigating or what is going on, then obviously we might be checking the person's ID. Like I know that there's a lot of different perceptions of what carding is, but specifically for targeting people for the demographic of who they are, I would suggest that we do it more for what they're doing at the time.
Okay. And then lastly, we're out at Enoch as well, are we not? Or we work with Enoch very closely?
We have our own building out there. They fall under the Parkland umbrella, but there is a detachment made up of 10 members and 2 support staff out there.
Okay. And is there a good relationship there with the First Nations community and stuff, working closely with the chief and the band?
Absolutely. The sergeant out there is First Nations. A number of the members out there are First Nations.
Okay.
And they have a great working relationship with Chief and Council, as do we here in Parkland with the Paul Band First Nation. I have regular meetings with the executive director and Chief and Council out there. Anytime that there is a concern, we do look at solutions for community improvement, as we do anywhere.
Okay, and then my last question, I guess. So this is great and everything. So going forward, do we look at how many women we hire? Do we look at how many minorities we hire? And I know maybe some people don't see the relevance, but when you do have diversity in your ranks, it does help with policing and the way things play out. So I'm just curious if we have a breakdown of how many women and minorities we do employ here at the division.
Well, in the RCMP itself, I would have to look up the numbers and let you know. Just speaking from the detachment level, obviously we do have a number of visible minorities, and I don't want to say invisible minorities, but other people that are minorities for a number of different reasons. And we do have a very high ratio, I would suggest, compared to other detachments, of male to female ratios as well. We've got a lot of female members, and it does fluctuate, but we can't control the specific people that come here. Those are sent to us by our HR department and with a number of factors that are taken into that. But I can tell you that here at the detachment, we do have a fair, I don't know exactly what it is, but there are a lot of female members working here, as well as a number of visible minorities.
Great. Thank you so much for answering my questions tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stevenson. Any other comments? I think would just like to add, I think it's important for all of us to understand that like racism exists in this country. And I think I would say that we all agree there is racism existing in this country. And I don't think it's just the policing or whatever, it's up to everybody to eliminate it. It's everybody up to start the conversation. And the recent world events brings more to light about that, what we all need to do. So thanks everyone for the comments on that as well from everybody. But at any rate, I just wanted to say, Inspector Loken, thank you very much for the work that your staff are doing. I can say unequivocally, there's certainly a more visible presence of the RCMP in Spruce Grove. I see it all the time, and I see a lot more cars driving in and around the community. And please tell the guys when they're heading back home to St. Albert or whatever, if they're driving cars, to make sure they drive through our neighborhoods and have that visible presence. But certainly appreciate all the work that we're doing. And the only other follow-up question is in regards to increasing some of the staffing levels in the detachment from K Division. Is there an opportunity to get another? I think Councillor Oldham had touched a little bit on the traffic unit, but is there an opportunity to get an additional 8-member unit out here to take up some of that space?
I think that obviously conversations were had it was a disappointment, not only to you, it was to us as well when we learned that the sheriffs wouldn't be joining us in the building here. And so there is a fair amount of additional future expansion space on the second floor of the building here. And so OSB, Operational Strategies Branch, is aware. We do have conversations, and I know that they have looked at a number of different units to come out here, and nothing has been decided on yet. But they are mindful that you know, this is a great building and it's in close proximity to the city, so it would be an excellent spot for somebody to set up. And I know the workers don't necessarily make the decisions, but I know that there are a lot of units that would love to be based out of here, because there are a lot of police officers and other employees of the RCMP and the Edmonton Police as well, who not only work in the city, but they live out here in the city of Spruce Grove.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks again, and just keep the conversation going, and any chance you can, and on our behalf.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. And on behalf of all of us, pass on to your staff about the you know, the excellent work you're doing, and it's challenging times for all of us, and you know, the crime and things that go on in the community never seem to go away, but we appreciate any efforts you can do to minimize that and stuff. And we'll close with that, and thank you again for your presentation. And I'll ask one of my colleagues on council to accept for information the report from the RCMP.
Thank you.
So if I could get a motion. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, I'll move that the RCMP report be received as information.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll call the question on the motion. Okay, thank you very much. That's been carried. Okay, moving forward, I have had a request. I'm just going to call a 5-minute recess, and we'll be back right after this very short break. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks. Everybody's back. Thank you very much. Okay, let's call the meeting back to order. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming back right away. And we will start to our next part of our committee of the whole meeting agenda. And that will be under the Protective Services Annual Report from Mr. Kostman. Mr. Wolanski, can you introduce our special guest and presenter who we always look forward to hearing from?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Chief Kosterman will be presenting his report. As council is aware, last year when we had some recommendations in ATE discussions that we made a determination to separate reports from a protective services perspective, enforcement services and fire, and then have a separate ATE. So this is the first opportunity that we've been able to do that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Kosterman, who'll be able to go through all of the next two reports with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Wolanski. Chief Kosterman, welcome, and council is looking forward to your report. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'll just share my screen here so you can see what we're presenting. So the protective service, are you seeing my screen? Can I just ask?
Yeah,
confirm?
yeah, looks
Okay.
good.
So the Spruce Grove Protective Services 2019 report. We'll start off here with fire services. So I know statistics and analysis can be boring, so we'll try to go through them and make them exciting as possible. The call volume increases within Spruce Grove continue. We have just over a slightly 2% increase in call volume within Spruce Grove on the fire side. We've had a consistent increase for the last decade. We'd always try to show fire as in the last decade. And as a matter of fact, in the last 10 years, call volume has gone up slightly more than 205% cumulative over those 10 years. And then the types of calls that we go on. So although there are many subgroups to try to make it as easy as possible, we try to put them into main groups. You'll see the one area highlighted in yellow. False alarms, an increase of 110%, and that kind of stands out over top of everything else. That's largely due to an increase in residential alarm systems. As residential alarms are being more and more common, we are seeing an increase in false alarms of those systems. Fires in Spruce Grove, 2019, pleased to say there was 28 fires with dollar loss, and there was only 9 other types of fires. You can see this this trend of trying to stay around the 30 mark has continued for the last decade, with the exception of the 2014, 2015 years where we had a spike due to arson activity. Fire losses over the last decade, in 2019, you can see we're slightly over $1 million in fire loss. I believe we had about $33 million of property that had fire, so over $30 million in savings. Jumping right into our response times. And the photograph you can see of the fire growth here, that's over a 10-second window, just to kind of put in perspective of why we measure this in seconds. I remember, Mr. Farbrother might not remember it, but we had a meeting many years ago where he was talking to city managers and mayors of other municipalities, and he made a note that we measure this in seconds as opposed to minutes. So I thought that was an appropriate picture as we're talking about seconds here again. So total response time, 399 seconds is our target. 74.6% of the time that was met, which was an improvement of 37.1% over 2018. Dispatch time, 79 seconds to try to have that through the 911 answering the dispatch was unfortunately only 1.7% of the time that was met, and that's no change from last year. The turnout time, time for the firefighters to get fully dressed and leave the station. The standard there is 80 seconds, and that was achieved at 95.8% of the time, and we're targeting a 90 percentile on all of these. Travel for the first apparatus, 240 seconds. That was achieved 77.1%, an improvement by 17%. Travel time in the second apparatus, that is strictly the travel time. It does not include the time for them to muster, as at some times that second apparatus has to come from a callback of off-duty staff, but the actual response portion was met 97% of the time. And HERF is one of the major ones that we want to always look at. That's the high intensity residential fire standard of 600 seconds. And that standard was met 97% of the time in Spruce Grove for all fires with dollar loss. Medical responses, total response time of 300 seconds, what we're trying to achieve. And that was improved by 16.9%, getting us to an 89.2% compliance rate. We're shooting for 90 again, so we'll call that as achieved. Turnout time, the time it takes to get the ambulance on the road, 93.7%, we'll call that achieved. And travel time of 240 seconds was 64.8% of the time, an improvement of 15%. So you can see where we're able to get out of the hall faster. It allows us a little more travel time. So that 300-second total time is what we're the one to really focus on. And we've pretty much achieved that at 89.2. Motor vehicle collisions are also tracked separately. The photograph you see up there in the screen is a car into the Scotia Bank. This came up a while ago in a conversation, and I don't think the city of Spruce Grove realizes how often we actually deal with cars into buildings. It's more common than you may think. Total response time, 399 seconds for collisions, was met 62.8% of the time. That's an improvement of 8.3%. Dispatch time here was up to 20.9%, which is an 18.8% improvement. Turnout time, 89.5% of the time, so we'll call that achieved. And travel time, 72.1% of the time, which is a decrease of 7.4% travel time to collisions. I will just end the fire service point by pointing out this, as with enforcement service, but more impacting on fire services. 2019 was also our transition year where the building was being constructed. We were working around construction equipment and then moving into the new portion of the building and new policies, new procedures, testing out new equipment, new alerting systems. So I think overall the service did extremely well in 2019. Enforcement services, there's a 2.46% increase in overall complaints, a 7.88% decrease in parking complaints, a decrease in animal complaints. However, we had a significant increase in property complaints. You can see on the chart there for complaints that bylaws to do with traffic, so around parking, snow routes and animals still remain some of our highest ratings for calls for assistance. And then general public assistance calls also remains high, and those are a wide varying degree of calls. How calls are received within the city, you can see the largest portion is still by phone at almost 80%, although we do have online reporting systems. Typically, people want to pull out their phone and dial the number when they see something wrong, as opposed to trying to navigate through an online reporting system. We do get the next largest portion, over 10%, is from officer generated. So that's while the officers are out on patrol or they're going to a complaint, they will witness something and take action on it themselves. And then there's a varying degree of other percentages that come there, everything from city administration, passed off from the RCMP, and front counter walking in. We do anticipate the front counter to increase, because we did ask the architects to design this building as a welcoming building, and we are noticing that we are having more people come in to the building for assistance than we did previously. Citations, we had a total of 44.1% decrease in citations, and also a decrease in animal citations, which means that the educational components are working and we've had to do less ticketing. Moving into the Safe City section of Protective Services. Traffic enforcement, joint operations increased by 88% in 2019. There was a question earlier when Inspector Locken was asked about joint operations with enforcement services. We do joint operations with Stony Plain, Parkland, Enforcement Services, and the RCMP. Like I said, an increase of 88% to those. We're happy to report once again, there were no traffic fatalities in Spruce Grove in 2019. And overall collisions decreased by 8.07%. And there's more traffic data is included in the automated traffic report. One of the council members did ask a question of the discrepancy in RCMP collision reporting and enforcement services, or Safe City collision reporting. I think the discrepancy may be there in the fact that when we counted our total, I believe it was 706, I'd have to look for the page there, within the city of Spruce Grove, that was all collisions, which include parking lot. And I would suspect that the RCMP may have excluded the collisions that were not on actual city controlled roadways. And ours included the parking lot collisions as well. Fire prevention. Fire prevention, of course, is very important to the city of Spruce Grove, particularly in the areas of construction, making sure that nothing happens during construction. That's one of the most hazardous times for us to have to deal with a fire. Inspections by occupancy, the majority of them were spent at industrial areas, followed up very closely between assembly, residential, and mercantile. The causes of fire in 2019, mechanical, electrical, of those that could be determined, remain the highest, but human failing comes in there tied at number 2. And then the cannot be determined are various reasons. It's either the extent of damage to the value that was of property damaged just did not make it feasible to spend the resources to determine a cause. Example of that would be if you have a vehicle that's worth, let's say in the neighborhood of $5,000, and there's nothing suspicious about the fire. To take that vehicle and store it in the wintertime in an indoor compound and tear it apart piece by piece to determine a cause would just not be financially responsible. Suspected arsons, we had 3 in 2019 that were suspected arsons, and those were turned over to the RCMP for further investigation. And at this point, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief, in regards to your report. And I'll open up the floor to my colleagues and council for any questions or comments. Councillor Roth.
Thank you, Mayor Houston. I can relate, Fire Chief, to vehicles trying to enter buildings via their vehicles, because that happened to my office several years ago, and the damage wasn't as severe as that. And I'm not even sure if there was a police report done. I don't know. I didn't know in the building. I have one question, I think, and that is, you'll recall several years ago that the council of the day considered opening a second fire hall, but instead of doing that, made the decision to expand the existing fire hall and move all of the enforcement services together. And we've taken a little bit of heat about that from one resident in particular. I'm just wondering how well it's working out, and if the reasons then are still as valid then as they are today, and whether, again, how well that decision that was made probably 6 or 7 years ago is working out.
Yeah, on the first part of your question about the singular station, given all of our response data at the time, the layout of the community, the future growth of the community, the engineering standards that we've put in, including preemptive lighting, the road network within Spruce Grove is exceptional for response from this location. I think that we have proven that it is a good move to keep it in one building from a training standpoint, a morale standpoint. Being able to supervise the staff, there are a number of reasons that make it a good decision, and the response data has shown that it has worked in our favor as well. From the component of enforcement services, I can recall earlier in the year, I was working on a Saturday and sending Mr. Rolanski a text message, just watching a motor vehicle collision come into the station, and the ambulances, the pumper, and enforcement vehicles all leave the station at the same time to go to the same collision with no delay in their alerting, because they're all in the same system. Made me very proud of the fact that we made that decision. The sergeant's office is directly next door to the captain's office. When they come back from an event, whether that's a natural gas leak, a motor vehicle collision, or a structure fire, or anything else that they may have responded to together, they're able to immediately discuss what worked, what didn't work. And I think that's creating lots of efficiencies within the system that we'll continue to benefit from as the years come. I hope that answers your question, sir.
It does. I have a second follow-up question, but a comment about that. I thought it was the right decision at the time. And I've had to defend it on more than one occasion to a couple of people, but I still think it was the best decision. The second and follow-up and last question is, at what point does the community reach a certain population, not by population, but also maybe geographic makeup of the community? When does it reach the point, in your opinion, that maybe a second station might be something that we would have to reconsider?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Roth. You did break up a bit there, but I think I got the gist of your question about a second station and when would it be required. Currently within the corporate plan, there is a second station identified south of railway tracks. And if memory serves me correct, I think we targeted population of about 5,400 people is our estimate, that when the population reaches 5,400 people in the area south of the railway tracks, that would be a time that we should start looking at a second station when we see that coming. Now, it might be 4,500, it might be 7,000. There's also things that we need to continue to strive to work towards, which is our relationship with our partners in Stony Plain, as their tracks, their station's already on the south side of the tracks. And if there's a road network connecting that into our south side, those are conversations we should continue to explore. But there is no set population when a community should have a station. I think we're governed by our ability to respond to emergencies, and we shouldn't get caught up in that, that trap of just doing it because everybody else does it. We should do it when it's justified.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Roth. Councillor Stevenson. Go ahead, Councillor Stevenson.
Great, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor, to Chief Kosterman. So I guess like reading the annual report, the one thing that jumped out at me, and I think you referred to it a little bit, is the dispatch time. It seems really, well, we're only meeting at like 1.7% of the time. Now we don't set this. It just seems really low, and there are some reasons that are given as to why we don't make the time, but what's happening with dispatch that 60 seconds isn't being met? It's only being met 1.7%, and the 79 second is only 7.7% of the time. That's on page 33 of the report, if you're looking for those stats.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Stevenson. Yes, the dispatch, we continuously have conversations with dispatch and we're trying to work with them. It's an area that we contract out, so we don't have the same level of control as we do on our own resources. We continue to work with them. We continue to make strides. We look for improvement. We did include in our report their data and how they report themselves in being in compliance with the Alberta standards. Example, on the 911 transfer side, I believe we reported here with regard to the transfer with 60 seconds of the 911 call, they reported a 97.5% compliance. So we did put that in our report as well. We don't want to miss out on that. However, there's a strong discrepancy between the standard that's been set in Alberta by the Alberta 911 Council, which is largely made up from the providers, in comparison to international standards. I will always question the order in which things are dispatched. We cannot respond to the call until we're given an address. That's the number one most important thing for us. And I do understand that although we are one of the largest service probably that they provide for out of that dispatch center, their policies and practices are largely around, what works best for the majority of their customers. And I do struggle personally with why we can't get that address right away first. We have one emergency in the city. We are responding our truck to it. The most important thing for us is what's the address, and let's get going. Give us more information en route. I don't understand, and I have the conversation often with my chief officers who are in conversation regularly with the dispatch center. I realize what we're asking for is separate and different from their normal operating, but we would like that address first. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's not really in our direct control at this time.
So you said we contract out to dispatch. Who is that with? Like, it sounds like they do dispatch for a number of different, maybe fire services or other emergency services. So what's the reasoning behind it? Is it a cost? Is it efficiency? What are we doing there with dispatch?
Well, currently there's two contracts. One is for the 911 service. Mm-hmm. And the second is for fire dispatch. Next, there's a third contract, which is for enforcement services dispatch. Okay. So currently, both the fire dispatch and the 911 is dispatched to Parkland. and they provide those services to us. So like I say, on the 911 side, when you look at the Alberta standard, they're meeting that 97.5% of the time. And on the fire dispatch side, we would like to see it dispatch faster. We'd like to see it in compliance with that standard. But in fairness, we did also provide the information from them of exactly what they're reporting to us, not just what we're seeing, but what they're reporting back to us. And you can see that on, it's page 12 of the actual report. I realize it might be a different page within the council agenda package, but for anybody else following along, it'd be page 12 of the actual report.
Okay. So in terms of fire services, are they dispatched to every single medical call?
No.
No.
If you're talking about a pumper truck as a separate entity, they are not dispatched to every single call. They're only dispatched when no Spruce Grove ambulance is available in Spruce Grove, or the severity of the call requires additional assistance. Now, with that said, during COVID, throughout the province, that has been reduced. So the 3 lowest levels of call priority are no longer being responded to by the fire services within Alberta. And that was a decision that was made by Alberta Health Services.
Okay, so if there is a medical emergency and you see number of, because you often see it sometimes where there's fire trucks that are first to scene and then an ambulance shows up. So I'm assuming once the ambulance is there, they assess the situation, then that's why you often see fire leaving first. So they're there as a first responder, but then allow ambulance to take over?
Yes, a dispatch sometimes will dispatch a call as a serious incident that on arrival, it's determined not to be a serious incident, doesn't require the extra resources. So those resources are freed up as quickly as possible. The other thing that can happen is why we always say if there's no ambulance immediately available in Spruce Grove, the pump goes regardless of the level of severity. Is just the opposite of that is sometimes calls are dispatched as a very low severity that end up being some of the most serious calls. And we don't want any to fall through the cracks. That's always been the fear, is we don't want that call that falls through the cracks. We've seen it across the province where then people are questioning and inquiring why the response wasn't adequate. We would rather never miss a call.
Perfect. Okay, and then my last comment is just a kudos to your enforcement services team. I know during COVID, the number of calls have been up. I might have made one. And so I had an opportunity to speak with the enforcement officers who came to the scene, and they were all gloved up and masked. And I had a great conversation with them just about like what they felt was the workload and if they were seeing an increase in calls, and they were extremely professional. And I did watch them in action, dealing with a couple of people maybe not obeying COVID. And I thought they were exceptional in terms of trying to educate versus ticket and stuff. So I just wanted to send a kudos to your team for the exceptional way that I think they're handling some of the incidences here in Spruce Grove.
Thank you. I'll pass it on to them.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevenson. Any other questions or comments? Okay, just Councillor Oldham, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought someone else might be in front of me, but thanks for the time. Couple questions, Chief Kosterman, and echo my colleagues' thoughts to thank you and your team for all the great work, lots of different challenges that everyone's faced in the last few months, and we sure appreciate the work that your team has done. The one consistent kind of stat that seems to kind of fall under the standard is the travel time. And I'm curious as our city grows out and therefore further away from the central station, is it possible to get a breakdown of in quarters or sections or somehow, obviously, for example, Woodhaven, you're likely there 100% of the time, but how often are you able to get to Prescott, for example, or another distant area of the city? And my suspicion would be as our city grows out, it's going to be challenging to improve upon that number. I'm super pleased to see that it was improved upon for this year for the most part. But can you comment as to the challenges that you'll face as our city grows and we have the one station in the center?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Oldman. Obviously, the further away you go from the fire station, the longer it's going to take for that response to occur. So you're not going to have an equal response time to every single neighborhood within the community. As we achieve a 90% response setting, where we're trying to say we're going to be there 90% of the time, we accept the fact that 10% will not get a response within that. I think the important thing when we look at neighborhoods, and to answer your question, yes, we can do that. We can break out any neighborhood. Is if one neighborhood, let's say they're only hitting 30% of the time, but what is their 90 percentile? And their 90 percentile might be 308 seconds or 327 seconds. Yes, it would be lovely to shave that 27 seconds off. And in that overall time, that's where we start working at, a quicker dispatch. What can we do to save time at the front end to gain us back? But, in my opinion, it wouldn't be financially responsible to, spend $2 to $3 million on staffing and the capital costs of a station to reduce 20 seconds. It would have to be in the minutes before I think that would be justified, in my view.
I really appreciate your comment on what is the 90th percentile, because it could be 5 seconds after the standard, which maybe not be as concerning as if it's 2 minutes after the standard. So that's a great point. And if that data is available for neighborhoods and you're able to share with council, I'd appreciate seeing that. One other thing I noted as I looked through all the information that you provided is there's a significant drop in the citations that were given for parking. The complaints were down 8%. The citations were down about 40%. Is this reflective of a change in how we are enforcing parking? Is it a change in parking regulations, or what kind of would speak to that significant drop?
I'm not sure if you're referencing a particular page within the document that discusses parking specifically. I think it was an overall reduction in citations, not necessarily related to parking.
It's a graph, I believe, if I remember correctly, and I didn't note it, but I'll find it here right away. There's a graph on citations is on page 18, I believe, of the presentation. There's a bar graph that seems to indicate, very close to 1,000. The long blue graph, and I know public watching might not be able to see it, goes up almost all the way to 1,000 under traffic safety parking. And that's 2018, and then in 2019 it drops down to 615. So that's the number I was referring to, or the graph I was referring to.
Yes, I've called it back up there on the screen again, the graph that you're referring to. I hope you all can see it.
It's not on our screen at this point.
Oh.
At least for me, it's not.
Okay. This is the graph you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, now that I can see exactly the question that you have, Traffic Safety Act parking, that probably has a lot to do with snow routes. That
Nice.
Probably has a lot to do with the fact that we have gotten much better compliance on our snow route parking.
Well, that's great, and that would go to credit to our residents and to our communications for getting the word out. I know we've talked in the past when we talked snow removal at a different time of the year, wanting to get, we're not seeking to give those tickets out. So it's really nice to hear that that would be in large part due to fewer snow route tickets, because I know that's always a challenge for both the snow removal and for the residents that have to deal with that. So really pleased to hear that. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Oldham. That was kind of similar to the question that I had, and recognizing what I was going to say was it seems to be a little bit of a change in culture too, Chief. I don't know if, and I do know this year the enforcement staff made a lot more effort to connect with people to move their vehicles and stuff like that, so they may be reflective of that. Just in regards to a question that Councilor Roth had, and I want to reflect on the decision we made, and we went back and forth quite a bit on whether we needed a second fire hall and stuff, and I'm really pleased with what we did as a city, and I think we made the right choice at the time, and I think your comments today verify that you agree with that very similar comment as well. So at any rate, I just want to pass on to you from our council and staff that your enforcement staff do an amazing job. They're very professional, and I greet them often, and I always enjoy connecting with them. So give them a little bit of a kudos from all of us and tell them to keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. I'll pass it on.
Councilor Grilke has a question. Go ahead, Councilor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to reiterate, Chief, thank you again for all of your information and your patience with all of this. I just want to kick this dead horse. So for Councillor Oldham said, and I think it was, I would like to put my support behind getting some information per quadrant or per neighborhood, because Councillor Roth had asked, you know, kind of when's our tipping point, or what is the decision factors for a second hall, or even other external measures. I know some of our regional partners make outlying areas do more fire cessation or sprinkler systems, which is of course something that we would like to try to avoid because it's an expense for development. So I just want to throw my support around seeing those statistics in future meetings. And then I guess we can analyze that to see what, my fear is that a tipping point is a major disaster. And I would like to, as you would, avoid that as the tipping point. I think stats and analysis can be our friend in this scenario. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grilke. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Acker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for your great report. It's great to see the numbers where they're at, and kudos to all your staff. I have two questions. The first is, you indicated there's been a big spike in false alarms. Is there anything you can suggest or have ideas of reducing that? Because we know as we move forward, home automation, more alarm systems, is there going to be a way for us to tackle some of those false alarms to reduce those calls, or is this just going to be a fact of life going forward?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Acker, there are some financial penalties the city could consider to impose on people who are repeat offenders, but most of the time, you know, it's a one-time deal. You go to the property the first time, they identify the problem, they fix it. We don't want to discourage that. The reality, though, when we used to only have alarms in commercial or industrial type buildings, we're now seeing them prolifically through the residential. Some jurisdictions have taken the approach that they no longer respond to residential alarms. They just simply won't go. What we have found is that there are a large number of false alarms. There's also the real ones where there really is the fire. And, you know, along with Councillors Grokely's comments about the further out distances and stuff, it's all about getting there as fast as possible and keeping the fire small before it spreads. And if we have to go to an extra, you know, 200 false alarms in residential buildings to ensure that the one or two that are actually in their incipient stages don't grow at 2 o'clock in the morning when no one else will see them and spread to 4 or 5 houses, you know, that's a preference for us. However, that said, I'll just share with you that a couple of years ago, we were having this conversation in Minneapolis. There's a group of 10, I'm one of them, I'm the Canadian rep, that gets together to talk about technologies with one of the companies that's, you know, out there and working on this stuff. And we brought to them that tying in the alarms just simply to the thermostats in the houses today. If the dispatch center can see the thermostat, they can see with that alarm if the temperature is going up or not. And if it even goes up 1 or 2 degrees, we know something's causing that. So I think that this problem will be solved with technology. We may be beyond my career period, but I believe that we will see a solution to this, but it will be technology based and not punitive.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. My second question, from your perspective, I see we have a part of the report here talking about complaints by neighborhood. And we identified 3 neighborhoods which are similar to previous reports. In your opinion, is there anything about those neighborhoods that stands out for causing their spike in complaints? Whether it's, you know, it's a parking issue because there's too much densification, the roads are too small. Is there things that we can learn from what you're seeing on the ground that can help us better define or design future neighborhoods?
No, Councillor Acker, I don't think there's any one item that would stand out that, you know, has to do with community design or anything else in those areas. There are a number of factors that can change the number of complaints that come in. And yes, parking, you know, can be a major one, and some good education. And we've done that in certain areas, and, you know, we've hit those complaints. But we can also have 1 or 2 outliers that just generate more complaints. You know, and it's working with them and educating them on what is a legitimate complaint. Okay. If somebody complains about their neighbor 14 times, that's still 14 complaints.
Gotcha. No, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, could I get a motion, please? Thanks very much again, Chief, for the report again. And could I get a motion from council to accept for information report? Councilor Stevenson.
Yeah, I'll move that the 2019 Protective Services Annual Report be received as information.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Stevenson. I'll call the question on the motion. All those opposed, if any? Thank you very much. That's been carried. Okay, moving forward, we're going to go on to item 4D. This is the Automatic Traffic Enforcement 2018-2019 Annual Report. Chief Kosterman, you still have the floor, so go ahead.
Thank you. We'll just share the screen here for the Automated Traffic Enforcement report. As Mr. Wronski had mentioned, this year's report is separate from the Protective Services report and contains significantly more information than previous reports have. And we continue to strive towards including even more information in future reports. As is commented here in the introduction, this was a process of manually reviewing tens of thousands of cells of data in order to put this report together. So with that said, we're post 2020. Now, COVID has caused us some grief in being able to tackle some projects because our time has had to be focused elsewhere. But our intention is still post 2020 that a lot of this types of reporting will be available to the public online on a monthly basis at the drop of a hat. And as requests come for information, we'll just keep adding to it. And it'll become pretty close to real time on some of the data that people will be able to analyze and look at for themselves. So the first one here is jump into is stop signs. So in the area of stop signs, 2019, our total time on each of these sites, you can see, so the site that had the most amount of time was 168 hours focusing on stop signs. And that's a very small percentage of the time. If you look at even 12 hours a day times 365 days, it's a very small sampling. And ATA was always designed to take a sampling in locations so we can determine whether or not we required some uniform presence. We had to get a little bit stricter with the enforcement, or could we just continue to monitor it? And if you look at the chart next to that, the 2019 hours versus tickets per location, you'll notice this is interesting that in 2019, the sites that had the highest violations per hour, like site 1274, got a very small amount of time. Although it had high violations, it wasn't warranted as an area that required a lot of time. And then areas such as 1262, 1261, 1252, and I apologize, the appendix contains the location to match with the numbers in the report. You see, although these had the highest amount of time, they were not the highest tickets per hour. If we just want to target the tickets per hour, we could have shifted things around. 2019, this was one of the stats requested by council, was tickets issued versus violations not ticketed. And you can see that 33% of all the violations at stop signs did not receive a ticket at all, though they were classified as a violation. And the total time that sites are monitored is only 0.625% of the time. So it's a very small sampling when you put it in those terms. And the highest monitored site only receives 1.85% of the total time available, which would be 24,365. And we issued 2,780 stop sign tickets. And of course, those are all done through mobile means, no fixed systems. The mobile red light systems, total time in 2019, the area with the highest was site 265. But again, if you look at the chart next to it, which shows percentage of potential time, again on a 24,365, we're actually monitoring the sites a very small percentage of the potential time they could be monitored. Because when you look at the ISD systems, they're 100%. 2018-19 mobile red light tickets per hour. We are very encouraged when we see sites like 293, where the tickets per hour dropped down significantly. And overall, there were more sites that had a decrease in violations than there were sites that had an increase. And again, those sites that have an increase, we may try to target them with some more traditional enforcement COVID has certainly caused us some grief with that, with the increase in complaints and not having the officers available. But that is an area that we would like to target with some uniform presence to try to make a change. And again, the tickets, the violations versus violations not ticketed. 63% were ticketed and 36% were not ticketed. Mobile speed. In the mobile speed slide, you can see 2019 potential hours. It's again very low when you look at the total potential hours. 2019 tickets per hour by mobile speed, site 1291 was the highest. There was 9,431 tickets issued compared to 10,360 tickets issued in 2018. So we did see a decrease in the number of tickets. The total mobile speed tickets, site 1292 gets the lion's share of those mobile speed tickets. And again, the violations ticketed and violations not ticketed. And again, the reasons for that are that there's an officer present at each one of these, and they have to form the opinion that they would pull that person over and ticket them. And sometimes people have violations but are not warranted a ticket.
Chief, I hate to interrupt. I know when I read this report, it would have been interesting for me to know where these locations were. They're numbered, but I'm kind of interested where 1292 is, where you're getting 3,650 tickets. Where's that location and why? 1292. I don't know if that's a question that you can answer.
1292 is Highway 16A eastbound at or near West Grove Drive. The appendix in the back of the report contains all of the site locations. It would be impossible to identify on the charts the actual address for each site. It simply wouldn't fit. Mm-hmm. So these are the site identifiers as registered with the Solicitor General's office and our own internal reporting system.
Okay, great. No, I guess it's at the end of the report, but I guess I must have just missed that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we do not have an ISD system at that location, so that probably gets more mobile service because we don't have a fixed system there. When we move into our fixed systems, again, if anybody has any questions about the locations, they're all in the appendix of the report, but certainly ask and I can point them out. Potential hours, you can see that sites like 9269, which is Century Road, northbound at Grove Drive, there was problems with this system and keeping it maintained over 2019. So it was not in operation very much, a very small percentage of the time compared to other ones, which were almost running 100% of the time. Our goal is that these should be running 94 to 96% of the time. They should only be down for regular scheduled maintenance. But the system is an older system that was in place. It's being all replaced now. That's over the last couple of months, all those systems have been replaced. Obtaining parts for these systems and maintaining them was quite difficult. 2019 red light fail to stops. This is one that always shows me that how well the ISD systems work. If you look at an entire year, this is the only fail to stop at red lights that were captured at fixed systems. Once people know the system is there, they stop.
Exactly.
This is one of the most promising signs. I always say that this is our biggest concern is people running red lights, and the ISD system certainly does keep the numbers down. 2019 speeding tickets issued. Again, 9271, which I'll just reference quickly, is Highway 16 westbound at or near Jennifer Howell Way, generates the most tickets. And if you look at 271, however, it was the one that was almost in operation the full year. So you'd have to look at an hourly rate to determine. And again, in 2019, we monitored just over 8.5 million vehicles, and speeding tickets issued was 9,366. So you see it's a very small percentage of vehicles that are actually speeding. When you look at the total number of vehicles that are monitored at 8.5 million, we're talking about a very small percentage of vehicles that are actually committing a speeding offense. Fines issued. This is, again, everything in this report is information that previously council has asked for to be included in future reports. So we've tried to capture as much of that as possible. When fines are issued, this is a comparative of 2018 and 2019. So you see in 2019, we issued about $900,000 in less fine dollar amounts. And victims of crime, the percentage that they received in 2019 at $563,000, and the province receiving just over $1 million in the system that they received in 2019. And those numbers will probably change 2020 going out, as we're seeing the province has intention to change the way the fines are issued and what percentage each partner gets. Fines by method, and showing exactly how much fines are generated from each of the systems. So in stop signs, we saw a decrease in 19. In red lights, we saw an increase. We saw a decrease in mobile speeding, and we saw a decrease in the ISDs. Again, I would hazard that the ISDs may be more to do with the system being down due to repair issues versus an actual decrease in speeders. Fine distribution in 2018, I don't think we included 2019 in the report. We had a limit on what we could pull together, but distribution of fines by enforcement method. So again, just showing what each of the three parties gets. Victims of crime, what they get, what the province gets, and what the city gets. And maybe just a clarifier here for everybody. Victims of crime is not victim services. Often people are confused. They think that the VOC charge goes to victim services. Victims of crime, we've seen it where somebody, let's say they're assaulted, and the victims of crime actually pays their ambulance bill, pays their extra healthcare costs because they didn't have extended insurance, maybe paying for some of the home support that they need after that assault. And that's where the Victims of Crime Fund comes in. Protective services costs 2018, 2019. This is one of the areas that we anticipate will become mandatory reporting with the Solicitor General's office. Again, because of COVID, a lot of stuff has kind of hit the brakes, but we're anticipating that this will be part of the annual mandatory reporting. ATE revenues in 2019 was just over $3 million. Fire services net cost, police services net cost, enforcement services net cost, and the Safe City, which includes the ATE costs, had a net cost of just over $10 million. So the ATE is the entire amount collected by ATE is less than what is spent on maintaining a protective services system, especially when you include the police and fire services in there. Collisions for 2019, this may answer the question that was asked earlier on the numbers too. Parking lot and driveways, there was 236 collisions that occurred in those. Vulnerable road users, that's people on bicycles, mopeds, wheelchairs in one case. 140 of those collisions were at intersections, 124 were rear end, and 188 others. The primary route collisions, so Highway 16A still remains our highest collision route at 117, Jennifer Howell at 82, McLeod Avenue at 81, and so forth. And those are the highest ratings you get down. When we get down to the sixth one, Calahoo Road Corridor, there's 44. So about 40% of what we're seeing on Highway 16A. So there's a very significant drop in the top 6 in collisions, and Highway 16A still remains our highest collision response area. Collisions by year in each of the locations, the top 11, I believe, is up there. And again, please note the last 3 in the row, they don't have a 2016 number because we were unable to obtain collision reports for those for 2016 for those 3 locations. So we can see 16A and Jennifer Howell actually had an increase in 2019, and we're seeing an increase again there in 2020. There was significant re-engineering there a number of years ago that greatly reduced the number of collisions, but we have been seeing the number increase in 19 and 20. So we'll be working with engineering to see if there's something to be done there. Areas like 16A and Century Road, you can see it continues to decrease. And across the board, Grove Drive, Calahoo pretty much is starting to plateau, but we continuously are watching these intersections because they're our worst collision intersections. Update on recommendations. So there were some recommendations that came with the operational effectiveness review and also with conversations that occurred with community and protective services directly with council. So we wanted to do a quick update on those. The little check mark system here is red X means we were unable to or we have not achieved it. Warning for first time offenses, failing to stop at red lights or stop signs. We're not able to achieve that at this time. It's something that we continue to look at, but we just simply haven't been able to implement it or achieve it. An investigation of Highway 16A speed limits and infrastructure. We are working with engineering on that. So the check mark with the white square means that we are progressing towards it. And I believe they have budgeted for that either next year or this year if they have the funds to do it. They're going to do a look at what can be achieved on 16A. Reduced in mobile hours. That's a circle check mark says we fully achieved that. We did average in 2019 66.63 hours per week of mobile enforcement, and we're looking at 54 hours maximum mobile enforcement in 2020, so approximately a 20% decrease. Additional ISDs have been asked for, and I'm pleased to report that the additional ISDs are being installed and they should be operational this August. Better frequently asked questions on the internet site. Communications has been working with us to ensure that, and when we get questions, they're posting them. Council policy was created. I believe that is now fully completed. There might be some final work on it, and it's my understanding, Mr. Ronski may be able to provide more information, but it's my understanding that there may be a desire to run that through the Road Safety Committee and get their comments or final inputs before a final sign off on it. The Road Safety Advisory Committee, the members of the public have been selected, and due to COVID, they're being delayed in a startup of meeting, but I believe that that is going to take place starting in September. Enhanced AT report. There certainly is more information in the report this year than we've had in previous years, and we're always open to questions to increase more information. The rationale for sites. The rationale for each site is posted, but you'll see this is not a permanent check mark saying achieved, because we believe that there's got to be a better way of mathematically showing why those sites are selected. Part of that just comes with the fact of time to commit to coming up with that, and we do not employ a traffic analyst in the city, and we've tried to work with the RCMP on that to see if we can come up with some better statistical analysis on why sites are chosen. But you may recall that all sites are currently frozen. Interactive mapping, we've come a long ways on this one. Our new contract provider has developed and will be going live with an interactive mapping system that will show the location of every ATE operation and whether they're active or not, how many tickets are being issued, how many vehicles are being counted. All the data will be available almost instantaneously. It may be a delay of 7 days for some of it. Increased ATA staffed enforcement balance. We've certainly increased the number of joint operations. We're trying to get more hours out there. We are still challenged with allocating RCMP hours to staffed enforcement when it comes to traffic within Spruce Grove, but we're continuing to work with them on that. The 2016 operational effectiveness review, all of the 2017 audit recommendations have been applied. We have increased public awareness. We have increased our monitoring and data. There was a cost of system request in that review, and we did 2 reports, and both came back that the current system of contracting out was the most cost-effective system to operate in Spruce Grove. Site selection, like I say, we have come a long ways on that, but there's still some work that we would like to do. Uniformed versus ATE, again, the struggle with determining RCMP hours. Covert versus overt. We've checked that box off completely because you will see starting in August a complete peace officer marked vehicle that will be identified with its own door logos as ATE. And unlike coloring, a vehicle a certain color, this will be an absolute no question. It's an enforcement vehicle. It'll be parked on the side of the road, clearly marked peace officer vehicle for automated traffic enforcement. And that will operate 50% of all mobile hours will be done from that vehicle. And with that, I welcome any questions.
Hey, thank you very much, Chief. I just have one very quick question, and then I'll open up the floor to council. But you had talked about the additional ISDs. Is that going to be? Can you give the locations of those that we're looking at installing additional ISDs?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have the locations right in front of me right now, but I believe Grove Drive and Jennifer Howell was one of the areas that we had targeted.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Okay, I'll open up the floor to my colleagues in council, and I will start with Councillor Oldham. Go ahead,
Thank
Councillor.
you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief, again for being here. I'd like to reference my questions back to the council policy that was approved in April of 2019. So I kind of reflected on that policy and kind of compared this report to see where some of the gaps were and things that might be missing. But before I get there, you referenced the ISD and that they're operational the vast majority of the time, although there have been some problems. There's a quote on page 80 of our package that I just want to get some clarification on. And the quote says that the total operational hours were 9,366 hours, or 52% of the total 61,320 potential enforcement hours. And those numbers, obviously, just there's a typo in there, but they share very different stories about the number of hours that are there. So I believe it's page 80. I'm just looking at my other computer here in our council agenda package. It's in the information, not the presentation, if that makes a difference.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Oldham, thank you. I will correct that in the report before it goes out.
Do you know which, so is 9,366 the right number of hours and the percentage is off, or is the percent right and the hours are off? If you don't know off the top of your head, that's
No,
fine.
I'm just doing a real quick math calculation here. The I would say the percentage is incorrect.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. So there was 9,366 hours is probably the likely one. Great. On the fine distribution on one of your graphs from 2018, you didn't have the 2019, and that's irrelevant to my question. There's an allotment to the city, an allotment to the province, and then an allotment to the victims of crime, but none to the payment of the third party operator. Can you just remind for us on council and the members of public, what percentage goes to the operator?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Oldham, I can't tell you right now what the percentage is that goes to the operator. In the previous all conversations has been the amount that they are actually paid is a protected area within the contract. But someone for a total dollar amount can certainly look at the budget and see what is paid for the operations of photo enforcement.
Okay. As you pointed out, and I had done the math, we had about 67 hours per week of mobile enforcement in 2019. Our policy went into place on April 23rd, 2019. How can we be assured in any way that the policy was followed May through the end of the year in terms of knowing that only 54 hours per week were done? And furthermore, as we move forward, you referenced 54 hours per week. That's my understanding is that's a maximum per each individual week, not the averaged maximum over the course of the year. Can you clarify both those points for me?
Mr. Mayor, again through Councillor Oldham, the council policy cannot supersede the contract that was in place at the time. We would be in violation of the contract. So although the policy was passed in 2019, that gave us direction in negotiating a new contract. So that change will takes effect here with the new provider in 2020. As far as the 54 hours, there is an averaging. It is not based on, we'll never exceed 54 hours in a given week, because there are times due to weather or other issues that they're unable to operate for part of that week. And then we would take those hours into another week, but we did put a clause in the contract that they couldn't exceed, and I believe it was around the 80-hour mark, that even with, if they'd missed a week due to weather, they wouldn't be able to go past that 80-hour or 84-hour mark in the following week. They would have to be spread out over a couple of weeks.
Okay, I can't be on the screen and be visible and get my count, get the policy in front of me. So I'll have to have another look at that. Is it possible? And I know this is a lot of detail, and I really do appreciate the amount of time and effort that staff put into this. Is it possible to get even a quarterly breakdown as to the average number of hours put in over time. Just something to consider as you move forward. You don't have to answer that now. I have lots of other questions and I don't want to take up too much time. Policy 3.1 in the policy states that we'll be reviewing the policy every year. We've had the policy for more than a year now. Do you know, or Mr. Wolanski know of an opportunity? We have a new member on council who didn't get to be a part of that initial process to be in compliance with the policy. Are we going to get a chance to review that to understand what we couldn't be in compliance with before because of the contract and how that will change moving forward with the policy?
I can see Mr. Wolanski has his hand up.
Mr. Wolanski, go ahead. Mr. Wolanski, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Oldham. So that's what Chief was referring to. The policy does state that it has an annual review. And so it was passed in 19. So we should have an annual review in 2020. And so our intent would be, as Chief referred to, that I think it would be a good thing for the Traffic Safety Committee to review that, the Road Safety Committee, sorry, to review that policy once they're established. And so before the end of the year, it will come back to council for consideration for an annual review with potentially recommendations from the Road Safety Committee. Great,
thank you. I look forward to that. I know I can't speak for everyone. They'll speak for themselves, but I know in our community there's significant concern with stop sign infractions. And so one of the things that I'm curious about, and this is for the fixed red light system, and you clarified for me that the fixed red light system operated for the 9,366 hours and gave out a total of $10,000 in fines in 9,000 hours. So when that system is there, it's very compliant. Contrast that to the mobile red light system, which operated, in my math, in 1,067 hours. So about a ninth of the time, and it gave out over $1 million in fines. So for our residents who are very concerned about maybe fines that are for very small discretions. And, you know, we talked last time we had this discussion around a stop sign has no discretion, right? Whereas speeding has discretion. If you go 5 kilometers over in a 60 zone, you're not getting a ticket. The stop sign has maybe officer discretion because they do throw away some tickets. But it's amazing to me that a mobile red light system operated by a third party gives out over $1 million in about a ninth of the time. So they're like, the proportions are absolutely insane. Can you help me understand how we can continue to justify a mobile unit working in our community when clearly the ISD does a better job, as you recognized, and it gives out way less unnecessary fines?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Oldham again. You know, I'm on the record as saying if it was up to me, I'd have an ISD at every single intersection because it works.
Great. So will additional ISDs correlate to reduced mobile enforcement then in those intersections?
Well, again, I think the nice part about a mobile enforcement is it's a user pay system to take the temperature and see are people actually complying and do we have problem areas. You know, it's not costing the city anything to go out and do that. We don't set the fine amount that's set by the province, right? We have no control over that. But again, if it was up to me, I would put an ISD at every intersection and have people stop.
And are the ISDs put in by the third-party contractor or are they put in by the city?
They are put in by the third-party contractor. It's the same contract.
Same contractor. Okay, so it's not a separate issue. So to me, we need to really focus on increasing our ISDs and communicate. I know we have a contract and we're bound by a contract, but communicate to the contractor that we really, and I have another point about stop signs coming up here in a minute, that those infractions are punitive relative to the benefit that I believe they provide for our community. But I'll move on to the mobile stop enforcement now. According to the chart on page 68 of the council package, cross-referenced, and I cross-referenced it with the appendix. So the last couple of pages in the whole package, and you know all the numbers, 1252 is this intersection, et cetera, et cetera. And then, and it's there for anyone to see. It appears that we have stop sign enforcement in the industrial area for about 650 hours a year. So 650 hours a year, we have stop sign enforcement in the industrial area. I struggle because when you look at the other data that you're providing us, there is not any data that shows that there are a significant number of collisions in that area. They're not in the top 11. There's no reference to it. And we have 650 hours of enforcement in that area, which moving forward with a 54-hour-a-week limit, that would be about 25% of our time, if we don't reduce those hours, is going to be just in the industrial area at stop signs when there doesn't seem to be data or information to back that up. Can you speak to why the contractor is allowed to be there so often?
Yes, Councillor Alderman, severity of collision. There are a small number of collisions in that area, but the severity is extreme. And we need to stop those collisions there.
It would be great if we could see the numbers. I would love, and I know that last time I asked you that question, you gave me the same answer. And the reason was FOIP. We can't give out 1 or 2 collisions because the Freedom of Information and Privacy Protection Act, I get that. I would love to see the numbers of collisions in the entire industrial select area. So all 10 or 12 intersections that we're monitoring at stop signs, the data there needs to justify the amount of time. This is a public process. As a city, we've committed to be public with our public and the residents, and we are not being very public right now with this information. And I don't want to be too critical, but just saying, well, it's a severity issue. We could take the scope from each individual to the area and give that information. And there's also a factor I think that's important, is that how many of our violations are for rolling right-hand turns and how many of our collisions are for rolling right-hand turns. My guess, and because the data isn't presented, I don't know, is that a large majority of the tickets are for rolling right-hand turns and a large majority of the collisions are left turning with severity, left turning and someone T-boning them. Because a really severe collision typically would be more of that type. Again, you're the expert, but because I don't have the data, I have to make some guesses and assumptions.
You have a number of questions in there, so I'll try to address the ones that stuck out. One, as far as seeing how many collisions, again, that interactive mapping system that we'll be launching, you'll be able to zoom in on any area of the city and see exactly what we're doing there for speeds, what we're doing there for stop sign violations, and what there has been for collisions. What we can't reduce under the Health Information Act is to talk about the severity of a collision at an intersection when there's only been one there, because then everybody will know who the patient is and we're giving out patient information. If you're sitting in an area that has 40 or 50 collisions, it's much easier to talk about the severity of 1 or 2 because nobody knows which one of those 50 people it is.
And again, that goes back to my question is, could we get a total number for the industrial area, anything south of the tracks? There's 8 or 10 stop sign places where infractions are given. And this is what we hear about all the time, is this rolling through, should they do it? No, but it's a minimal cost. And again, the impact of our 20 to 25% of our time being there doesn't seem to be prioritizing safety if we can't prove that there are collisions in the area. And again, I understand that we can't say 1 or 2, but in the area of the industrial zone, we have to be able to justify to our public that we are there doing enforcement on stop signs on a Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. because there's reason for it. And we just don't have that. So when a resident comes to me, I can't say, oh, I don't know, because there's 1 or 2 and it's serious. It doesn't fly. We need better information for that. One other one I have for you, and it's interesting because each of the numbers and the graphs sometimes represents part of an intersection, because there's south and west and north and east and all the different directions. And the really interesting one is when you look at Spruce Ridge Drive and Spruce Ridge Road. In our data that's provided to us, there's 4 separate graphs that are indicated at that intersection. So again, I did the best I could looking at the graphs and the numbers. We had 260 hours of stop sign enforcement at that one intersection in Spruce Grove. 260 hours in a year. That seems really excessive to me. I don't live in that area, so I never go by there. It would seem to me, if I'm a resident of that area or a business owner in that area and I frequent it, that it is an unfair ratio of how we're enforcing 260 hours at one location when there's many stop signs in the city that we're not enforcing in any way. Can you share with me the data that would support that level of enforcement?
On that particular intersection, again, although there's 4 directions, you have to look at each one of them separately. I'm sorry, you can't combine them because they are 4 different directions. There are 4 different potentials. So the hours that are spent there are a very small percentage of the total available enforcement hours. When you look at 24/7, you could be enforcing that law at any location. So it is still a sampling. The reason that particular location has been given a high amount of attention over the last couple of years is it has a high residential area, there's school, pedestrians. But again, you know, it's a terrible excuse to fall back on, but we don't have a traffic analyst. You know, we're trying to do some of this off the corner of our desk. We don't have the ability to fire all this data to somebody and say, analyze it and give us back the answers. We're talking to officers, we're talking to people, we're trying to come up with the best we can do. I'm hoping with the Road and Safety Committee that has been established that we'll be able to work with them on some of these questions to say, okay, you know, here's the data we have, you know, with their questions and maybe them doing some research and helping us, we can do a better job of choosing locations. But for the time being also, we're frozen right now. You know, the province froze our location, so we don't have the ability to go somewhere different.
Just a point on the number of enforceable hours. I think it's really important that we frame that as 54 hours a week times 52 weeks per year. So it's not that it's a very small percentage of the enforceable hours, because we only have 2,808 enforceable hours in a year. Doesn't matter how many days and how many weeks and how many hours, we are capped at 2,808. So if in the 2020 year, they spend the same amount of time there, it'll be 9.3% of our total enforceable hours at virtually what is one intersection in Spruce Grove. I respect that there's different sides to that intersection. And it just, to me, like, I'm not a traffic analyst, that doesn't seem to match our community and all the needs. And, you know, we hear of different people speeding down Longview Drive and Calahoo Road, and we're spending 10% of our time at a stop sign in one corner, like literally one corner of our city. I can't justify that to residents, and so I have to bring that to you as a challenge, as to something to look at, because it's just not something that I think is sustainable.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Wolanski. He wants to join in on the conversation. Mr. Wolanski, go ahead.
Just a quick comment, and it's certainly something I think we can tie it together in future reports. I know it's anecdotal and Chief may have more of factual evidence, but on that particular location, the ones that I respond to that I then put to, it's probably been the #1 complaint that I've received. So it also, some of our enforcement is based on public complaints, and it's the #1 area that I've had to respond to as the GM. And I know that's anecdotal, but we can certainly tie complaints too as well to some of the data and some of the justification for hours in future reports, because I think it's a good point.
And again, there's no data there for collisions that supports the hours, and so there's been less than 8 collisions, because on your graph of the 11 most intersections with collisions, the bottom one is at 8. So there's been less than 8 at that intersection. So I'll leave it. I appreciate you taking the questions and answering as best as possible. And I'll pass it on to any other councillors that have some comments or questions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you much, Councillor Oldham. Anybody else would like to join in? Any other questions or comments? Councillor McKenzie, go ahead.
Oops, I turned off my video instead of started my mic. Thank you, Councillor Oldham. You asked a lot of great questions and that sort of thing. And your last little segue is the only question that I was going to ask. And it is talking about the Spruce Ridge Drive and the Spruce Ridge Road intersection. I struggle because I don't live over in that area, but we do own a business in that area. And so we see that, and a lot of our customers complain about the amount of time that it is being watched. And I know last year during the same presentation, I actually talked about that. And where I struggle then is I look at the same one in the industrial, and I hear the answer that, okay, it's severity of the collision. And I look at that intersection and I think, okay, we've got residential, we've got schools, we've got reasons to slow the traffic down. And so, yes, potentially. So you know, is there a way of maybe we need to look at a different mechanism as opposed to just a two-way stop? Maybe we need a four-way stop. Maybe we need to do that. And then I understand, you know, you're making the, excuse me, the comment that we don't have a traffic analyst. Maybe we need to then look at contracting out something like that and looking at some of these key intersections. Because I struggle, because I think the last 3 years, these are the same questions. And, you know, what you're bringing to us is fantastic data. It's way more than what we've ever received in the past. But I really, really am struggling right now with still a few of these key intersections that is making it hard for us to justify still. I want to back, I believe in ATE, I believe in increasing the safety in our communities. I think without the presence, it's not good, and I think that we need it, but I think we need to be able to truly justify those. So I just wanted to state too, because that's the only intersection that I was going to question about. So thank you, Councillor Oldham, also for bringing that up, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McKenzie. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Grilke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, thank you, Chief. This is like the best report that we have seen to date, and I'm sure it took you and a number of staff a lot of time, but I will say that it is certainly appreciated. The last thing that you said was actually one of the things that I was most excited about, was that the covert versus overt, that there's actually going to be a marked vehicle. Can you clarify, is there just going to be one marked vehicle, or are all of the mobile vehicles, including stop sign and speed, going to be marked?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Grilke, just to clarify, it's one marked vehicle, and they're not limited in the number of vehicles, but for 26 hours or 27 hours a week, it's only one vehicle required for the company to purchase. And they can only use that vehicle in Spruce Grove because it is identified specifically for Spruce Grove. So the Solicitor General's office will not allow them to use it anywhere else. So it's a significant commitment. And it will be for 50% of the hours. So 50% of the time, it'll be the fully marked vehicle, and 50% of the time, unmarked vehicles. And the intent of that is always to say that constant education, they can see the vehicle, they can see it's identified. City of Spruce Grove, automated traffic enforcement, peace officers, they can see that plain as day, to remind them that the system is there, and then they won't know, where it is on a regular basis as far as the covert side of things. So it's a stronger educational tool. The studies that we've read have all said the 50-50 seems to have the best result in slowing people down and changing behaviors.
Sorry, just my host muted me. I just want to clarify, you use the word vehicle and vehicles. How many vehicles total are there on any given 54-hour shift? What's the maximum number of vehicles that could be enlisted?
The way the contract is designed, there is no maximum number of vehicles. They could rotate through as many different vehicles as they have as a corporation. But that 54 hours is the cap that they're allowed to provide. And if they do it all within 3 days.
But again, so out of the 54 hours, they could do however many vehicles, but half of that time is with that marked vehicle.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for letting me nail that point down. I just wanted to reiterate some of my other councillors' concerns. For example, as you know, and I'm sure as many of your staff have heard, our most vocal and most impassionate complaints of late have been rolling stops or failure to stops with the mobile enforcement. And we try to justify their presence, and we try to justify, we get shown videos of pedestrians and near misses. But unfortunately, when they're getting a over $300, almost $400 ticket, and sometimes multiple tickets, as the mayor can attest, that he's heard from those residents, that is a challenge. And Councillor Oldham made the comment that there is some discretion in speed, but there's no discretion in stopping. I've gotten a rolling stop ticket, and I watched the video of if I would have held my breath a millisecond longer, I think it would have been okay, but you can't argue with the video. So it's a challenge to justify some of the locations based on the data. And so I look forward, I feel like we've kind of kicked this can, but we've gotten better. We've got exponentially better on the amount of information that you've provided. But I think there's just a little bit more that is needed in order for that either justification or non-justification. And if it's non-justification, we're going to have some harder conversations, because I know we don't necessarily get a full say, but I think this council will definitely be looking to have that, especially with those Road Safety Advisory Committee. So my final question is, the new contractor comes into place with new technology and new reporting. You might have said this, if I missed it, can you just reiterate when they come into place? Or is that impossible to say?
Sorry, the contract has been awarded and they could come back into place at any time.
Right.
And that's the message we want to give the residents right now, to the residents, is those systems could be turned on at any time.
Certainly.
There is no warning period required by the Solicitor General's office, because we have a system that we are currently, been operating.
Sure.
And we don't want to say to people, that location is out. The more people who believe the entire system is up and running, the better.
Certainly. And I guess that's not my point. I'm not meaning to give somebody misinformation. I'm just curious as to when we will be able to start seeing the new information that with site selection or site data on this website.
We anticipate the site to be up and running in August, and you'll be able to see all the data in August.
Fantastic. Again, I support my other counselors' comments and concerns, and I look forward to our next meeting when you are presenting all of the recommendations from the advisory committee and this new mapping system. So thank you, Chief.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grilke. I'm just going to go to Mr. Farbrother right now. He's requested an opportunity to talk about one of the items, and then I'll go to Councillor Stevenson right after that. Go ahead, Mr. Farbrother.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is great, actually. It's interesting that we've now got data that is causing people to have serious conversations around choices. And at the end of the day, this is not ultimately an automated system. There's a behavioral component, which is around where do you put it, when do you put it, who controls it, who manages it. And so there's a couple of pieces here. One, under the new contract, there is greater ability to actually performance manage the contract. And in all contracts, all private contracts, there is a motivation to make sure that that contract is a profitable return on investment for shareholders. That is the normal course of business in all businesses. The city's job is to performance manage that contract in the public interest. Secondly, with the collection of data and the technology that's available, we're now moving into big data, where you can actually do AI analytics on this, and then it will start to line up the outcomes or the locations with the desired outcome. But we're in the formative stages here. Like the idea that this will suddenly blossom into something that everybody is really comfortable with, because in 6 months is not going to kind of happen. But it will start to move to a point where there's the line of sight between risk and enforcement is demonstrated. The other thing that you've done as a council is you've created a body to do this work for you, which is the Advisory Council. And so all this information, this conversation that you've had just in the last hour, is exactly the kind of conversation that we anticipate that advisory committee is going to do, except they're going to spend hours and hours and hours and go through all the elements of it. And then what they will do is bring to you a summary, so that you don't have to spend all that time doing that. You've delegated that decision-making or that advice to them. And so I think you can anticipate a fair bit of adjustment over the next year because of those those elements. Simply that we will have better information. You've got an independent body looking at the information, not just administration. And you've got a contract that is easier to performance manage than you have had in the past. It will continue to reinforce the fact that four-way stops are a cheap design, but they're not necessarily a great design. And analysis has shown that roundabouts save lives because they don't create that T-bone situation. And it's the T-bone situation that fundamentally drives the stop on red light conversation. So I'm just, I think we can feel your frustration. But the good news is that the data is now there in a fashion that you can express that frustration. So that's actually a good thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Stevenson, and then I'll go to Councillor McKenzie that wants to join back in after that. Councillor Stevenson, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree, like with a lot that's been saying, and especially with the Road Safety Advisory Committee, I think that's going to do a lot of good. So I'm going to try and tie all three of my comments together. The first one is what's happening with the Solicitor General review, because they were looking at whether or not they would continue with the ATE program. And is that written into the contract? I understand there's details about the contract, but if the province comes back and says no more ATE, what does that mean for us as the city and this contract essentially?
Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Stevenson, the contract does address that. There's a risk that the contractor takes in buying equipment and installing technology, that what if the system was to shut down, and through the contract, the city does assume some liability in that risk if the province was to shut it down tomorrow. But that risk is lessened every day of operations.
Okay, but because we just signed that contract, I imagine it's at most risk right now.
Correct.
Okay, and we knew the review was coming within the year though, like last year we knew this. So this
Correct.
is a pretty big risk, and we're assuming that they're going to allow some type of ATE.
Correct. We've been actively participating with their review, and we have a strong sense that we have, of what they're going to do.
Okay. So with the annual review, Mr. Wolanski was referring to that we do an annual review with council, and certainly now with the Road Safety Advisory Committee being able to provide recommendations. What does that look like? I think we have to be really transparent with our residents to say, like a contract's a contract, you're setting it up. Obviously there is a profit motive, but in terms of flexibility and for the Road Safety Advisory Committee to be able to provide direction and not just a lip service to say, hey, yeah, we've got this advisory committee in the city, look at the good we're doing. What understanding is there from the contractor that we've contracted with, understanding that we do have an advisory committee, understanding we do take on an annual review, and that the potential for changes or recommendations is in fact there?
There are some shared responsibilities here. The advisory committee certainly can make recommendations to council, but at the end of the day, when it comes to site selections and tolerances, those are RCMP decisions, and by legislation remain with the RCMP solely.
Okay, so that'll be an interesting discussion, I think, at Road Advisory, because I think that's it's always something that we're told, but then we hear from other people that that's not the case and stuff. So I guess really and truly, I think we have to be very, very clear on what the roles and responsibilities are from the committee, and really make sure that we are transparent with our residents on what those limitations are, and certainly for the committee as well. So I'm very curious how this is going to play out. I guess my last one is that for years, we've always heard that, like, it's a cash cow, that a lot of money is made, especially here in Spruce Grove, that compared to other populations or other cities, that contractors can make a significant amount of money here. Have we ever put together information on how much other cities are making off the ATA program, and do it on a try as much as we can on a cost per population?
Councillor Stevenson, everybody doesn't release their information, and I think what we've released in this report is probably the most detailed financial release that I've seen in any of the municipalities as to breakdown of the fines and who achieves what and how much was written. So it'd be pretty hard to draw that all together. There was a report written by the province that did take a look at how many tickets and how many hours of operation are done. And I can't speak for the municipalities, but I can say that the information in that report in regards to Spruce Grove was erroneous at best. It was so far off the mark that I don't even know where they got the numbers from. So I can only assume that that would be a lousy report for me to look at and do a comparison of how Spruce Grove is to other communities when I can't trust the data that's there in regards to Spruce Grove. I can only assume it's wrong for everybody else as well.
So other municipalities aren't expected to provide this information?
To the level that we provided here tonight with financials, I don't know of any other municipality that's providing that level of detail on their fine generation.
Okay. And then my last, I guess, comment or question is, we break it down by province, like who receives the profit or the money essentially, and the victims of crime is there. That has been in the news a lot lately about what's happening to that fund and whether it's being raided, it's being used for other things, including potentially for policing in rural and stuff like that. Lots up in the air. Are we required to pay into that fund, or can we direct that type of profit into another fund that is for victim services, et cetera, et cetera?
No, that's taken straight off the top by the courthouse for victims of crime. It's a
So that-
surcharge on, it's actually a surcharge on the ticket.
Okay.
A lot of people confuse the dollar amounts, but if you were to
Okay.
get a $300 ticket, there would be currently a 15% victims of crime surcharge, and I believe it's being moved to 20% or maybe even north of that. So although the amount of the ticket written will change, the fine actually is not changing, but the surcharge is changing. And that's put on by the province, collected by the province, and distributed by the province.
Okay, and that's on every single ticket for ATE, regardless of what type of ticket it is?
Correct, on every single ticket.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenzie, you wanted to make a correction on something you had said. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide clarity because I think my dyslexic brain said that backwards, because I'd indicated like that the intersection at Spruce Ridge and Drive and Road is currently a two-way stop. I know that it's a four-way stop. I'm saying maybe if you went to a two-way, then, because what happens, the reality is when you come up to a four-way and you can't see any vehicles at a four-way stop, and that's what I was trying to make reference to, talking about the severity. And so I just wanted to, I'm pretty sure I said the opposite, and as soon as I clicked off, I'm like, oh, I went backwards. And so that's what I was talking about, is maybe you go from a four-way to a two-way, because I do believe the speeds isn't warranted enough that is a high collision intersection. So that's where I was just getting at. So I just wanted to provide that clarity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Oldham, go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor, just to clarify a point that Councillor Stevenson had made, the Tantas report was one that covered a large number of municipalities in Alberta. And the number quoted for Spruce Grove for that year was 5.15 million. If you cross-reference that with the report that came to council March 18th, 2019, we were just over that in 2016 and just under that in 2017. So the number is kind of probably around this, the number. And so to give Councillor Stevenson and others some comparison, if we were around 5 million, the city of Edmonton was around 50 million, which is 10 times more for a city that's 20 times bigger. St. Albert was less than ourselves. Strathcona County wasn't available. Medicine Hat was half of ourselves. Lethbridge was less than ours. So according to that report and according to the numbers from our council agenda package from March 19th, 2019, we are significantly higher per capita for charges in Spruce Grove. So just wanted to follow up on that while I found the information before we signed off. So thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Wolanski, did you have anything to add? You're kind of punching your cheek like you wanted to say something. You were going like this.
No, I was just going to add, further to Simon's comment earlier, because I think it's an important one when he talks about, we hear the frustrations, and I'm excited because actually he wasn't here before. I think I've heard much less because I think that we're not where we need to be. We know that, and I think you're seeing that we're trying to get to where we want to go, and the new contract will help with that. But further to that point, I don't want to just defer to the road safety. I've been taking active notes, and these are the kinds of things that we'll take to that committee to say, here's some of the questions, here's some of the concerns, here's some of the things we'd like you to kind of provide feedback on. So it's been noted and well received. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for the input as well. And I can say from a council perspective, we do hear a lot of negative feedback from our program. But it was interesting on the report how we had almost 9 million vehicles that went through our systems, and a small percentage, which really isn't a small percentage when you equate it to a fine, but we still have a large number of people that are not respecting the rules in our community. And that's reflected in the fines that they're getting. And a lot of people will say to me, yes, I didn't stop, but it's just the size of the fine. And unfortunately, we can't set that. I have to say one thing, which in my term as mayor and on this council, I heard more complaints about McLeod Avenue and the four-way stop at Nelson Drive than anything else, other than photo radar, of course. And it was the same thing. It's a four-way stop. People are going to get killed there. Nobody knows how to use them. And administrative, if your council will recall, did not want to change that into a four-way stop. But, there are other traffic measures, and I want administration to take this away to say, and I'm going to use an example, and many of us have traveled to California and Arizona, but they have traffic control or traffic slowing measures. And yes, they're not a traffic bump, but they're actually a traffic depression. And you can't drive fast through those things. You have to actually stop. And I would really encourage, because I've heard more complaints following the other four-way stop from our citizens, from council. It's just inundated with traffic, how we handle that intersection. Let's fix it. And I've been to Ireland, and they'll paint a white circle on a road and people can figure it out. I'm not kidding. They don't have to have a fully engineered traffic circle, but as Simon had indicated, four-way stops, traffic circles are better. So let's, even administratively, before the traffic safety committee tells us, let's please look at that intersection and see what we can do. The other one, I'm really encouraged to hear that we're getting some new automated systems. I always believed in automated systems. And I think Mr. Wolanski had indicated to me, we can't just put another automated system at intersections we want to, because we can't have any more new ones right now with the new provincial regulations. But looking forward to the Traffic Safety Committee doing some work for us, and looking forward to some further conversations on that, and appreciate all the feedback. But I think Simon's other big point, and I know Aaron follows up on this a lot too, is artificial intelligence and taking that data and correlating that data in a fashion that justifies it sometimes. But at any rate, I'll close off there. And thank you very much, Chief, for the report, and look forward to moving forward with some of our new systems. And I understand that's going to start in early August. So we need to get our message back out there that traffic safety is important to us as a city. With that, I don't see anything else on the queue. I will ask for a motion to accept for information the report from Chief Kosterman. Councillor Grilke.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that the Automated Traffic Enforcement 2018 and 2019 report be received as information.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Grilke. And thank you everyone for the feedback and all the updates as well. It's always a challenging issue for us, but at the end of the day, I think as a city, based on the contracts that we have coming forward, and that we're taking it cautiously and listening to the wishes of council. With that, I'll ask for one more motion.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Can we please vote on that last motion?
Okay, if we have to, yes. Sorry about that. Thanks for keeping me in line. All those, I'll call the question on the motion. Thank you. That's been carried. Just about had a perfect meeting there, almost. Anyway, thanks again. Okay, can I get another motion?
Motion
Councillor-
to
Motion to adjourn from Councillor Oldham. Thanks very much. I'll call the question on the motion. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks again.